So the audio kind of sucked in this section, so I just wanted to do a voiceover here, but I wanted to introduce my 2017 Giant Anthem Advanced Carbon frame. I put a Bafang BBSHD electric motor on it, and I just kind of wanted to outline how I made that happen because it is definitely not straightforward as if you are putting it on an aluminum frame or a steel frame, and it requires a significant amount of bracing if you want an impermanent solution, which I did because I am now stripping down this bike and I'm going to be moving the motor onto a new bike. So yeah, hope you enjoy, hope you learn something.
So as you can see, we have a BBS HD through this bottom bracket. And one thing to note is this is a 68 millimeter BBS HD, and this is a press fit 92 millimeter bottom bracket. What this means is that I had to get the Lecky adapter, which is really slick. It is this red thing right here that basically slides into the bottom bracket and allows you to use a shorter BBS HD and threads onto the threads within the bottom bracket. And this has a internal ring that basically holds the shaft of the motor and centers it within the higher diameter bottom bracket. This makes it super easy to move this onto another bike, which is what I'm going to do, which has a 73 millimeter bottom bracket. You could get a 100 millimeter Bafang BBS HD, which has the longer shaft, in which case you would just need these metal bushings that go inside the press fit bottom bracket and essentially center the shaft, and then you would just use the standard nut to tighten this down. Now you notice I have this aluminum bracing right here, and it's actually 2 pieces of aluminum thick. Pretty sure this is 1/16 inch aluminum by 1 inch, 1.5 maybe, I can't remember. And I've just threaded it through the rear shock hole mounting point to allow the suspension to move, but to hopefully prevent this from moving up. I actually only originally had it with one piece here, and this was the solution that I thought would work, but it didn't work. There's too much torque and it would bend this piece of aluminum, and the motor, the problem with that is this piece right here will jam up into the frame, which you've seen it has done up in here at some point, and it can create a hole, especially with carbon, because carbon is very brittle. So essentially what I've done is I've added on the other side this piece of aluminum, which then bolts into the bolts or the holes that go on the side of the actual motor. They're very hard to see. I'll throw in another shot here that shows them. But essentially I have Loctited a few very small bolts with washers into the actual motor, and then I've routed it through this bottom shock bracket point so the rear shock will still work. And essentially now what this is trying to do is this is trying to pull upwards, which is then trying to lengthen the aluminum, which is not going to happen. This is essentially just here for redundancy. And if I were to remove this, it would bend this. There is plenty of torque on this to actually bend both of these pieces of aluminum, which then sends this up into the bottom of the frame and will crack the frame. Now, you may be thinking, well, why don't you just, you have this mounting point right here, whatever this is for. Why don't you just stick a piece of aluminum up here and thread it into there? Well, I did that, and it worked for a couple days. And then one day I noticed that it did not work because it had actually ripped this part off. There's so much torque from this trying to push or pull. I can't remember. I think it was trying to pull down on this piece that this actually cracked and came off. Now, there's so much torque on these that it will flex the frame. And you can tell I think it must be the rear triangle, which is aluminum, but you can tell if you are on a high power mode, high pedal assist, it will like tweak the frame and twist it back because there's so much torque. I don't think there's any damage or anything. I mean, the bike rides beautifully, but it just goes to show that you need to have proper bracing on this. Now, how most of these work is on this red piece, on this red aluminum piece, there are spikes. So I have also added a nylon washer in between the carbon frame and this bracket to protect the carbon frame, because carbon is very strong, but it is very brittle, from the spikes that are intended to grab into aluminum or steel within this adapter. So what some people do, and the link's in the description to the post that I followed but didn't follow because I didn't go their route. What they did is they essentially, in a lathe, they carved out bushings that went inside of the bottom bracket, but then also came out and created a washer between the actual mounting hardware, the spikes, on the Bafang motor nut and the frame to protect the carbon frame. Now, one guy, he epoxied those in there, so he basically could never turn his bike back to analog, which I'm glad I didn't do. And the other guy did not epoxy them in there, and he says that it's working great. He basically just press fit them in there. Those posts are pretty old. I don't know how well they're still working, but they worked for a while at least. So that's the setup that I have. It has worked amazingly, but now we are going to put it onto the Surly Bridge Club. And I have a roll-off hub here, which I'm pretty excited about, because honestly, what I learned from this bike is that the suspension and everything is amazing. But the thing that I like doing the most is just hauling shit, you know? Like, I have this, I made some custom brackets down there that basically allow you to mount one of these on there, but it flexes pretty good. I'm not gonna do it right now. And it'll hit the tire if I have too much weight on here or in the panniers. So I really just like hauling stuff, and the steel bike is gonna be significantly better for that. The e-bike's amazing. Highly recommend anybody get one, build one, and it's super easy to build. You don't need the carbon frame, and I would never do the carbon frame again. I would pretty much exclusively go for either aluminum or steel. You save a couple pounds with the carbon frame, but honestly, it's not worth the hassle at all. And once you have electric assist, the poundage doesn't really matter, especially if you have a configurable controller that you can dial in your custom pedal assist modes and the power that you want to have in them. Don't get a carbon frame. I mean, unless you want the slickest bike out there, which I did, and I regretted when I had to build it. But then once I built it, I mean, it's freaking amazing. So luckily nothing bad happened with my experimentation, and hopefully if you're building one of these, you can just go right into the route that I found to make this work. And I have probably 800 miles on this now, and the setup's worked great. I've used full power multiple times. I mostly keep it on a low power just because I like the exercise, but yeah, everything works beautifully. Haven't had to tighten anything down besides the cranks a couple times. It's pretty awesome. All right, keep on cruising.